I never wanted to be a park ranger. Growing up in East Texas, I dreamed of getting out, heading somewhere with less heat and fewer mosquitoes. But life has a way of dragging you where it wants, and after a few bad choices and a stint in the army that ended sooner than I'd planned, I found myself back home, working as a ranger in Big Thicket National Preserve. The job was simple. Keep hikers on the trails, check permits for hunters, and make sure the occasional lost camper didn't become coyote food. But lately, something had felt off. It started with the disappearances. Not the usual kind. Tourists wandering too far, getting turned around, showing up sunburned and dehydrated 3 days later. These were different. Hunters, experienced ones, vanishing without a trace. No distress calls, no half-eaten backpacks found near animal dens. Just gone. The locals had their theories. Mountain lions, some said. Cartel, whispered others. But I wasn't buying it. Something else was out there, something moving through the trees like it owned the place. Last week, we found a campsite deep in the woods, past any designated trails. Torn tents, food left to rot, and no sign of the 3 men who had set it up. Their truck was still at the trailhead, keys in the ignition. No blood, no struggle, just absence. It gnawed at me. I spent nights replaying it in my head, picturing those men sitting by the fire, laughing, drinking. And then nothing. Then came the reports. Hikers claimed to see people moving in the woods, not rangers, not campers. Something else. One woman swore she saw a man, naked and covered in mud, watching her from the underbrush. When she called out, he ran. On all fours. Another group reported hearing whispers, voices speaking in a language they didn't recognize. The worst one came from a father and son. They said they saw a figure standing just outside the light of their fire, long-limbed and silent. When the father reached for his rifle, the thing grinned and disappeared into the trees. I wanted to write it all off as paranoia, but I couldn't. I knew these woods. I knew the normal sounds, the normal dangers. And this wasn't normal. Something was changing, something creeping closer. The question was, what? Then, a week ago, I got the call that changed everything. Another missing camper. Solo hiker. Last seen 2 days ago. The only clue. A message left in the dirt near his tent, scrawled with shaky fingers. They watch, they wait. I packed my gear, checked my rifle, and stepped into the woods. If something was out there, I was going to find it. Or it was going to find me. I hiked deeper into the preserve, the trees thickening around me, turning the world into a tunnel of gnarled branches and whispering leaves. I'd been on this trail 100 times, but today it felt different. Quieter, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The wind barely stirred, and the usual sounds of birds and insects had faded to nothing. That wasn't normal. I reached the missing hiker's last known campsite by mid-afternoon. It was just like the others. Tent half-zipped, sleeping bag still inside, a fire pit cold and abandoned. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just that message scratched into the dirt. They watch. They wait. I crouched down, running my fingers over the words. The dirt had dried, but the letters still held their shape, deep and deliberate. Whoever wrote this had taken their time. A branch snapped in the distance. I froze, hand instinctively reaching for my rifle. Nothing moved. Just trees and shadows. I exhaled and stood up, forcing my nerves to settle. I wasn't alone out here. I could feel it. I checked the perimeter of the site, looking for anything the first search team might have missed. That's when I found the footprints. Bare feet, small and narrow, almost childlike. But the depth of the impressions, they weren't from a kid. They were from something heavier, something that walked low to the ground. The tracks led away from the site, deeper into the trees. I hesitated. Following them was a bad idea. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, call for backup, let someone else deal with it. But I wasn't built that way. If something was taking people out here, it was my job to figure out what. I followed the tracks for about a mile before I saw the first sign of them. Structures, crude and unnatural, hidden between the trees. At first, they looked like fallen branches, just tangled debris. But as I got closer, I saw the patterns. Lean toss made of sticks, small figures carved into bark, bones hanging from twine like wind chimes. They rattled softly in the breeze. Then I saw the figure. It was crouched just beyond the nearest lean-to, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the trees. At first, I thought it was an animal. Thin, hunched, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. But then it turned its head, and I saw the face. Human, but wrong. Eyes too large, skin caked in dirt, lips curled back in a grin that didn't reach its eyes. I lifted my rifle, heart hammering, but before I could move, it bolted. Fast, impossibly fast, disappearing into the brush like a ghost. I should have left then. Turned back. But I didn't. Because in the distance, beyond the trees, I heard something else. Laughter. And it wasn't alone. The laughter came in bursts. High, breathy, and wrong. It echoed through the trees, bouncing between trunks, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I stood frozen, rifle raised, my breath coming too fast. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the shadows between the trees. My radio crackled at my hip, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled to unclip it. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Holt. I need backup at." A sharp whistle cut through the trees. It was close. Too close. I turned fast, scanning the woods. Nothing moved. I was about to radio again when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of my vision, half hidden behind a tree. Tall, thin, and covered in what looked like strips of animal hide. Its face was streaked with dirt, and its eyes, they didn't blink. I raised my rifle. "Step out where I can see you." It didn't move. "Now," I ordered, forcing my voice to stay steady. The thing cocked its head, like a dog hearing a sound for the first time. Then, slowly, impossibly, it stepped backward into the tree line, melting into the shadows like it had never been there. My finger twitched on the trigger. I wasn't dealing with some lost survivalist. This was something else. The whistle came again. This time from behind me. I spun around. Another figure stood between the trees, barely visible through the underbrush. Then another, and another. All watching, all perfectly still. My stomach turned to ice. I had two choices. Run or stand my ground. I wasn't about to end up like the missing hikers. I took a slow step back, then another. The figures didn't follow, but they didn't disappear either. Then, from the trees, a voice. Low, rasping. Words I couldn't understand. And then, English. "You don't belong here." I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush, my boots slamming against the dirt. The laughter returned, rising behind me, dozens of voices shrieking in the trees. I didn't stop. Not until I saw the break in the tree line, my truck parked right where I left it. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and floored it down the dirt road, not daring to look in the mirror. I didn't need to. I knew they were still watching. And worse, I knew I'd be back. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those figures standing between the trees, watching, waiting. Their voices echoed in my skull, the laughter twisting into something almost human, but not quite. I thought about calling my supervisor, reporting what I saw, but what the hell would I even say? That I found some kind of tribe, cult, monsters? No one would believe me. By morning, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe the exhaustion, the isolation, had played tricks on me. The mind can do that out here. Turn shadows into shapes, wind into whispers. But that didn't explain the footprints, or the message in the dirt, or the way they moved. And it sure as hell didn't explain what I found when I got back to the station. I walked into the ranger office, half expecting someone to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, the place was buzzing. People crowded around one of the desks, whispering in hushed voices. I pushed through, heart already sinking. There, spread across the desk, were photos. Fresh ones. The first showed a deer carcass. Skinned, gutted, and arranged in a way that turned my stomach. The second was worse. A pair of human boots, abandoned in the mud. One still had a foot inside. And the third. I swallowed hard. The third was a grainy night vision shot taken from a trail cam just a few hours before dawn. A figure stood in the middle of the frame, barely recognizable as human. Thin, covered in grime, arms too long for its body, and its face. I turned away. "This was taken 10 miles from your last position," my supervisor, Garrett, muttered. "What the hell is going on out there?" I could have told him. I could have told him about the voices, the figures, the way they moved like they weren't bound by the same rules of nature we were. But instead, I just shook my head. "I don't know." Garrett exhaled sharply. "We're going back out. You, me, and 2 others. We need to find out what happened to that missing hiker." I should have said no. I should have walked away, packed my bags, and quit right then and there. Instead, I grabbed my rifle and nodded. Because I already knew the truth. We weren't going to find him. But something was waiting for us to try. The 4 of us rode out in silence, the truck bouncing along the dirt road toward the last known location of the missing hiker. Garrett drove, knuckles tight on the wheel. Next to him sat Torres, a veteran ranger who had seen just about everything the wild could throw at a man. In the back with me was Carter, younger than the rest of us, still green. He kept his rifle across his lap, his knee bouncing. "You sure about this, Holt?" Garrett asked without looking at me. "No," I admitted. Nobody laughed. The sun hung low when we reached the site. The campsite was still there, untouched since I found it. That message, "They watch, they wait," was still scrawled in the dirt. Carter muttered something under his breath and checked his rifle. We spread out, moving in pairs. Garrett and Torres checked the immediate area, while Carter and I followed the footprints I had found the day before. They were still there, leading deeper into the trees. My stomach clenched, but I kept walking. The woods grew darker, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. About half a mile in, Carter tapped my shoulder. "There," he whispered, pointing. Up ahead, another one of those crude structures stood between the trees. Sticks lashed together, bones strung from vines. A warning. We stepped closer. That's when we saw it. A body, or what was left of one. It sat slumped against a tree, head tilted back, mouth open in a silent scream. The skin had been stripped in places, exposing muscle and bone. His chest had been cut open, ribs spread like someone had been studying him. Carter gagged, stumbling back. Jesus Christ. I swallowed the bile in my throat. The thing that unsettled me most wasn't the body. It was the fact that the wounds weren't fresh. This man had been here for days, but I had just reported him missing yesterday. A whistle split the silence. Carter whipped around, rifle up. What was that? Another whistle closer. I grabbed the radio. "Garrett, Torres, we found something. We need to get the hell out of here." Static. Then, laughter. Not from the radio. From the trees. It came from all around us, circling, taunting. Dozens of voices, high and breathy, rising and falling in waves. The sound made my skin crawl. Then the first figure stepped out from the brush. Pale, thin, its body covered in streaks of mud. More followed, slipping from the trees surrounding us. Eyes too large, teeth flashing in the dim light. They grinned. Carter fired the first shot, and all hell broke loose. People come to the Rocky Mountains for adventure, peace, or to escape the grind of their daily lives. For most, it's a place to hike, camp, and marvel at the untamed beauty of the wilderness. But I know better. I've been a park ranger here for over a decade, and I've seen things that make me wonder why anyone would dare set foot in these woods. People go missing here, more than you'd think. And when they vanish, they are usually never found. Sometimes we get the occasional hiker who loses their way and is found after a day or two, exhausted but alive. But then there are the others, the ones we never talk about. The ones whose stories we quietly sweep under the rug, because no one wants to admit the truth. That something out here is taking them. It was my 3rd year on the job when I first encountered it. A young couple, newlyweds from out of state, had gone missing. Their car was found abandoned near a popular trailhead, but no sign of them anywhere. We launched a search. one of the largest in the park's history. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers, the works. After a week, we found nothing. No tracks, no campsites, no sign they'd ever even been in the forest. I remember the night it happened like it was yesterday. We were staying in one of the cabins the park reserves for overnight search efforts. I was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, when I heard something outside. A low growl. Not like any animal I'd ever heard before. At first, I thought it might be a bear, but something about the sound was wrong. It felt too deliberate, too close. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, but I didn't see anything. The trees were thick around the cabin, casting long, dark shadows in the moonlight. The growling stopped, replaced by the sound of something moving through the brush. I shone my light in the direction of the noise, but whatever it was fast. Too fast to be a bear. The next morning, we found the couple, or what was left of them. Their bodies were in a small clearing about 2 miles from the cabin. The scene was brutal, unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. It wasn't an animal attack. It couldn't have been. The wounds were too precise, too intentional. The investigation was quick and quiet. They ruled it an animal attack, but everyone on the search team knew that wasn't true. We were told to keep our mouths shut, to move on and focus on the next case. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in these woods. Years passed, and more people went missing. Some were experienced hikers, others were families just out for a day trip. The disappearances all happened in a certain area of the park, but no one ever drew attention to that fact. It was easier to let the tourists believe that the mountains were just dangerous. Risky terrain, unpredictable weather, the usual stuff. Then, 2 years ago, I saw it again. This time, it was a solo hiker, a man in his 30s who had been missing for 5 days. We found his campsite first. It looked untouched, like he'd just stepped away for a moment. His backpack was still there, his gear neatly arranged. But there was no sign of him. I was paired with another ranger, Emily, and we were assigned to search deeper into the woods near a series of caves. The terrain was rough, steep cliffs and thick underbrush. As we approached the caves, the air grew colder. Not just a mountain breeze kind of cold, but bone-chilling. My gut told me we shouldn't be there, but we pressed on. That's when we heard it again. The same low growl I'd heard all those years ago. Emily froze beside me, her eyes wide with fear. I whispered for her to stay close, and we moved toward the cave entrance. The growling got louder, more insistent, and I could hear something moving inside the cave. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Something large, hunched, with glowing eyes reflecting the light. But as soon as I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing echoing through the cave. We didn't stick around to investigate. We turned and ran, not stopping until we were back at the cabin. Neither of us spoke about what we'd seen, but I knew she felt it too. The unnatural presence, the overwhelming sense that we were being watched. The next day, the search was called off. The official reason was poor weather conditions, but I knew better. They didn't want to risk sending more people into that area. The hiker was never found, and his case, like so many others, quietly disappeared. Over the years, I've pieced together enough to understand that whatever is out there isn't human, and it's not a bear or a mountain lion either. It's something ancient, something that doesn't belong in our world, but has somehow found its way here. I've spoken to other rangers, the older ones who have been here longer than me, and they know about it too. They just don't talk about it. It watches from the shadows, stalking the trails, waiting for people to wander too far from the safety of the paths. And once it has you, there's no escape. I've heard stories from native elders who claim the mountains have always been home to spirits. Some benevolent, others not. I used to dismiss those stories as myths, but now, am not so sure. So if you ever find yourself hiking in the Rockies, remember this. Stay on the trails, and never, ever venture too deep into the woods. Because there's something out there, something that doesn't want to be found, and it's waiting. I worked nights as a park ranger for a fairly urban city that had a variety of small to medium-sized parks I was tasked with patrolling. The largest being around 80 acres, but being in an urban area, mostly consisted of removing people sleeping in their cars after sunset, as all the parks were fenced and had to be locked at night. I'd say about 90% of the time, I came across a car belonging to someone down on their luck, just looking for a safe place to sleep in their car. Had a lot of sympathy for those people, but unfortunately, my job was centered around keeping the surrounding parks empty at night, and had to be the asshole telling them to leave or sleep somewhere else. The other 10% of cars I'd come across had a distinct fog to their windows that meant one of two things: either they were smoking weed or getting it on. I had a very loud intercom inside my patrol car that brought me great joy when rolling up on unsuspecting lovers engaging in a little car fun and watching them scramble to get decent. I know, dick move, but it was one of the few bits of excitement I had of the otherwise long and monotonous nights. The oddest and most memorable, however, I had traded the night for a day shift, which weirdly enough had its fair share of foggy windows as well. I went to check a parking lot behind a rec center that often had people trying to stay out of sight for good reason, and noticed one lone car with the classic window fog. As I approached their vehicle, I noticed an older man having his own fun in the bushes within arm's length of the car window. Older dude outside the car takes off at the sight of my car, and I say on my intercom, "Put your clothes on, can't do that here." To my surprise, the young couple came up to my car after dressing to apologize, and I tell them to grab their friend that ran away and to leave the park. Their eyes widened and didn't understand what I meant by friend. I had to explain to this couple no older than 25 that there was an older male masturbating while peeping into their window, and I was not kidding. They were both mortified. I went to look for the older guy, but at this point he had fled the park. I reported the incident, but nothing much to go off other than a rough description of what he looked like, and the two lovers didn't want to stick around for a police report. I never saw the couple or the guy in the park again. In 1987, I experienced an event which I later recalled while under hypnosis. After the regression session, I was able to remember some other details, including that I had missed about 3 hours during the incident. I was living in Arizona near the Santa Catalina Mountains. One afternoon, as I was sitting in a lounge chair on our back porch, I suddenly realized that I was being dragged into a craft by two small aliens. The next thing I remembered was waking up on a table inside the small craft. A guide greeted me and gave me something to drink. I believe that it was a stimulant of some kind because I was not sleepy after I drank the substance. In fact, the taste was quite pleasing. I was then taken out of the craft, looked around, noticed I was standing on top of a hill. It was dark, but I noticed a light near a cavern. I walked up to this area, and it was then that I saw a man, dressed in a red military-type jumpsuit. My guide seemed to know this man as he greeted him. I also noticed that he wore some type of patch and was carrying an automatic weapon. When we walked into the tunnel, I realized they were going right into the side of a large hill or mountain. There we met with another guard in red, and I saw a computerized checkpoint with 2 cameras on each side. To my left was a large groove where a small transit vehicle carried people further inside. To my right, I saw a long hallway where there were many offices. We took the transit car and went for what seemed to be a very long time to another secure area. I was then told to step onto some type of device that looked like a scale and face the computer screen. I saw lights flashing and numbers computing, and then a card was issued with holes punched into it. It appeared to be an ID card. My guide did not speak much, but did tell me that we had just entered level 1 of the facility. I was eventually transported to a lower level where I witnessed additional armed guards. I was then taken down another hall, and there I noticed a horrible putrid smell. I then saw huge tanks with computerized gauges hooked to them, and a huge arm-like device that extended from the top of some tubing down into the tanks. In a large laboratory-like room, I noticed a small gray being with his back turned to me working on something at a computer. I was then told to sit at a table in the middle of the room. About this time, a man-human dressed like a doctor entered the room. He wore a white lab coat with a badge. The temperature in the room seemed awfully cold. By this time I was frustrated and began to cry and to tremble. Then suddenly I felt a stabbing pain. Screamed, and the human doctor stood next to me and rubbed something over my stomach. The pain immediately subsided. Soon I became drowsy and was returned to the porch. When I awoke, I was laying on the porch floor by the door. For several months after that day, I knew something had happened, but I was unable to comprehend what it was. That is why I sought medical help. I have not had any other encounters, but believe that I will in the future, though I was never told this. One day in autumn 2015, I came home from school early as I skipped the last 3 classes. I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was around 12 noon. All the lights in my house were off, and I was wearing earphones. I went from my kitchen to the living room, and as I looked at the small couch we have in my parents' house, I saw a thing staring back at me. It wasn't for a split second, it was staring at me for like 3-5 seconds, front facing me, so I know it wasn't just my brain. Eyes mistaking a random object for a human-sized being. It wasn't very tall, about 5 feet would be the tallest it could have been. It had a human-like body shape. Its skin looked like candle wax, and it was very wrinkly. Kind of reminded me of it, but it looked way more old and pretty much dead. Its hands weren't human-like and had long dark nails. Its eyes were all black and they looked hollow. It had brownish hair on its head, legs, and arms. It didn't do anything, just stared at me for some seconds. I looked away or blinked, I don't remember which one, and it left or just vanished. When it looked at me, I felt both terrified and in awe. But it looked familiar, even if I haven't seen it before, or since. I felt like its intentions weren't necessarily bad. I don't think it was a hallucination, because there is no history of schizophrenia or anything similar in the family. There is no history of any mental illness on both sides. I would like to know if anyone knows anything about this creature, or if anyone has a similar experience. I don't think it had ears. As for a nose, I don't remember clearly. If it did have a nose, it was just a small black opening on its face, where a human's nose would normally be. Its face was a mixture of demonic and alien features, only the body was humanoid. Its eyes didn't indicate aggressive behavior exactly. It was more that it was staring at me out of curiosity, but it looked pretty alert and ready to fight back. Its face was wax-like and wrinkly like the rest of its body. A weird kind of oval shape, if I recall correctly. So I'm 45 now. I was thinking about this randomly and was bored, so I decided to ask if anyone had an experience with the board. A real experience. I'm actually afraid to talk about it. I was 12 when I first started using one by myself. It started moving just fine. I became obsessed with it and used it regularly for about 1.5 years. There was a name. When I asked who I was talking to, it spelled out Bobby Mihalovich. I'm not sure of the spelling of his last name, so I don't know. All I know is I'm afraid to talk about it because I did it by myself for a few years, and I can still remember that it was moving on its own. I would even try to trick it sometimes by lifting my fingers off the planchette, and it would continue to move for about 1 inch before stopping. One time it even levitated while I was using it with my brother and friend. You could feel the pressure of the plastic pushing on our fingers upward, and we pulled away when it got to be a few inches in the air. But I'm mostly concerned with my own experiences and using it by myself. I mean, I used to come home from school and just hop on the board like no big deal. No one told me it was fake or demonic. I just thought it worked. It felt creepy but natural at the same time. What I'm telling you is the truth. I felt it move. I talked to this thing for hours. I was old enough to know if it was fake or bogus. I see a lot of people telling stories about the board, but I don't believe them because if you really had used one the way I did, you wouldn't want to talk about it. Until now, anyway. Is there anyone else out there who has experienced this? Bobby Mihalovich. I've been wanting to speak about this for a while. This happened around April 2018 while I was staying at my aunt's apartment in Aurora, Colorado. Her apartment was located on the second top floor behind a high school field. It was around 2-3 in the morning, and I got up to use the restroom when I decided to stop by the kitchen and look out the window. To my surprise, I came across what I can only imagine as a skinwalker. It was pale and had glowing eyes along with spider-like limbs. It was digging into the ground, and I was too shocked in the moment to think about recording. It's been 5 years since then, and I can't stop thinking about it. Has anybody ever come across this, or does anybody have any additional information about this? I'd love to know, please. Happened to my dad 20 years ago. Now he laughs about it, but he told me it was his scariest camping experience. He was hiking in rural France with a friend and night was falling. They had stopped in a little town to shop groceries and went back in the woods to try and find a place to sleep. Mind you, they didn't have any lamp as they were young and careless, and soon they didn't see much more. The moon was bright enough for them to be aware that they were still on a forest path, but nowhere to plant a tent. Soon, they don't see anything anymore, but realize their environment has changed, and they seem to be in a larger space than the path. There is grass on the ground. They assume they are in a clearing and set up tent. In the morning, they are woken up by very loud engine noises, very close to them, and they jump out of the tent, scared as shit. Turned out they slept on a roundabout in the middle of road works, and the construction guys had kindly turned on the engines to warn them they should leave. I was once camping in the Santa Barbara backcountry with a couple friends, about a 10-mile hike in from the trailhead. The last morning of our trip, as we were making breakfast and packing up our campsite, we heard voices on the hillside up above our camp. At first we thought it was a couple guys coming down the trail, but their voices didn't get louder or closer, and we realized they must have been watching us and talking to each other, not realizing we could hear them. After about an hour, they came down the trail, two middle-aged white men with rifles and backpacks with antlers sticking out. One was short and stocky and one tall and slender. The short one came marching off the trail toward us and said in a gruff voice, "So what kind of weed you guys smoking?" We had of course been smoking weed, but I didn't see how that was any of his business. My friend answered, "Oh, just swag, but we just finished it off." At which point he proceeds to bring a pipe out of his shirt pocket and exclaimed, Well, just have to smoke mine then." The tall and slender man still had not spoken, and something just felt off. He passed the pipe to my two friends first, who both took a hit, and then to me, and I refused, saying that I didn't smoke. The short man then asked me to hold his backpack, which he slung off his back and basically threw at me. There were antlers sticking out the top and blood dripping out the bottom, and he asked me, "How much do you think that weighs?" To which I responded, "I don't know, maybe 35-40 pounds. Apparently I was dead on, and he explained that they had butchered the deer in the backcountry to bring back the meat, which he shoved right in his backpack. This is when they introduced themselves as Ralph and Keith, and proceeded to tell us that they had been childhood friends growing up in Santa Barbara, and used to hunt deer in the area as kids. Their whole lives they've met up for a hunting trip in the area every year. Keith, the slender, quiet one, married a DA in SB County, and Ralph had moved up to the mountains outside Yosemite, married a nice fat woman who baked, and walked the power lines through the mountains, inspecting for fallen tree branches and the like. They ended up being cool, if not weird, older dudes, and I kind of wish I had smoked with them, but I think I made the right decision in the moment. Once upon a time, I was walking the shores of Loch Orcai, and a nice old woman with a walking staff appeared behind me. We chatted for a good while about how she walks these shores every day. Then, after wishing me safe travels, we walked in silence. After a few minutes, I turned around, and she was not to be found. The loch is said to be home to many legends, kelpies, fairies, and other such things. It was also very near the famous Battle of the Shirts. I'd been camping along these lochs for days, including Loch Ness, where I had an encounter with two suspicious elderly me and two tornadoes. I stealth camped a bit deeper in the woods that night, but that is another story. Edit. There was not two elderly me, they were older men. Though perhaps they were suspicious because they were alternate universe older me. They asked if I wanted to camp with them, and I noped out of there. Though they were likely just two nice fellow hikers on the Great Glen Way. Went camping on a small barrier island directly off the coast of my state. We get there, offload the boat, and get everything set up, and out of nowhere my older brother says, "Dad, why does it look like the boat is so far away?" The anchor someone broke and left us with a chain and piece of metal with no teeth. I was around 11 or 12, and was the only one in my family who was a stronger than average swimmer because I was on swim team, but I also slightly suffer from thalassophobia, meaning I can manage to swim in the ocean just fine if the water is clear, not too deep, and I have other people with me, but none of these conditions were met. I acted on necessity, started the swim with very little thought, and about halfway to the boat, I made a huge mistake and looked back towards the island and realized how far I had swam. At the very same time, something touched my foot, I think. And I did my best Michael Phelps or Jesus impression and freestyled it to the boat at super high gear. I was so freaked out by the time I got to the boat that my muscles were not cooperating at all, and I had to sit down and breath for a few minutes before I was able to complete even the smallest task. I served my Mormon mission in the state of Oklahoma. At the time I lived in a small town with a large population of Native Americans. It was the middle of winter. We just gotten some fresh snow. I went out to look in the shed to see if we had any ice melt, and to go through some boxes that were left in there from previous missionaries. No one was outside. There were no tracks in the snow, and it was extremely quiet. I heard a voice from outside the shed door calmly say hello. I said hello back and turned around. Nobody was there, the only tracks in the snow were mine. The neighbors were not outside. It was just me alone outside. Not a scary story per se, but that cemented the paranormal to me. I'm pretty sure I may have encountered something. I've been hiking through forests all day, and I thought I saw something odd out of the corner of my eye earlier, but I figured it was a peaceful entity because I got no weird vibes, and I was walking peacefully and respectfully through the forest. However, I'm staying in a little pension B and B type place, and I started feeling really off, and my general vibe was weird, so I wanted to reset by meditating in their garden. While looking at the stars and stating my wishes and goals during my mindfulness process, I start hearing what sounds to be a cat yowling. I am one to always help an animal in need, but this yowling started to echo and sound really odd, almost distorted and just really messed up, so I immediately went back inside. What makes this even more creepy, which is why I came in here to get opinions, rather than just move on from it and go to sleep, is that my mom, who I am here with, saw something earlier and yelled, "What the F is that?" and said she saw a fox, mink, rat creature underneath a stop sign. She later described it as a cat, but really low to the ground. But I live in the Czech Republic, and you don't really see minks around here. My brother and I were confused because we didn't see anything. And then she said, "Let me go up to it, maybe I can scare it." And keep in mind, I think she is pretty in touch with good or bad omens. She's a powerful woman and won't take shit from anyone if she doesn't want them to. And she would never want to scare a random innocent creature. But I gather that her intuition told her that running up to it and scaring it away was the right thing to do, because then she said it scurried into the bushes. Supposedly, I never saw it or heard it. Another neighbor later asked us if we were looking for a cat, which means that this howling was the third or fourth connection to something weird. So maybe when I was alone outside, this entity thought it could get my attention through howling and sounding like it was in pain. I don't know exactly, but I did know to come inside immediately because that howling was demonic, and I did not want to help whatever sound was coming from multiple directions. Opinions. My mother was telling me about an encounter she had at my grandfather's home about a month ago. She described going outside to smoke a cigarette, and she saw a being around 7-8 feet tall, long arms down to the ground almost, and very, very thin. This being was about 20 yards away from her in the yard. My mom is a very big fan in the paranormal field and just the oddities in the world. But she said it made her feel very uneasy, and she went inside to get my grandfather, and it was gone. She also said it made a horrific noise at her that no one inside heard. She said it sounded like a screeching static noise. Now, me being the millennial, I am immediately thought of Slender Man. My mother had no idea who that is, but she was describing him to a T. I played the Slender Man noise for her on YouTube, and she started shaking and in tears told me that's what she heard. Can anyone help me figure this phenomenon out? I know there will be some naysayers and skeptics. I was as well, but she legitimately has never heard of him or seen him before, so I'm genuinely intrigued. They also see a lot of UFOs out the country where they live in rural Middle Tennessee. I'm a Silicon Valley, San Jose, California native, and have frequented the adjacent Santa Cruz Mountains all my life. This incident happened on the Loma Prieta Grade Trail in the forest of Nisene Mark State Park in the late summer of 2019. My girlfriend at the time and I were hiking on a Wednesday morning. There were already people around. This is a popular trail as it's a really beautiful locale. That said, there were also stretches when it was just the two of us. I think it's a 5-mile hike total, and we were about an hour in when my girlfriend had to relieve herself. There were thick trees on both sides, so we looked for a clearing on our right side. We saw not really a path, but an opening, and walked past the tree line, maybe 20-30 feet in. She wanted to be out of sight of anyone who passed by. I tossed her my backpack, which had toilet paper, and she ducked behind a tree. I walked back down the clearing about halfway, but I could still see her. She's squatting and in, just waiting. Like I said, I could see her the whole time. It was darker inside the trees, obviously, but I could still see just fine. So I'm standing there with nothing to do but look around me. That's when I caught the movement of something on my left. There was a medium-sized tree with a very distinct, very dark hand on it. It was about 10 or so feet away. At first, I thought it was someone wearing black gloves. I don't know why, but I immediately thought it was some biker pervert looking in on my girlfriend. That's when I saw the face peek out and everything turned upside down. I can't say with full certainty, but I do say it was 7-8 feet tall, easy. I'm 6'2". I only saw a half of it, but it was everything you would expect from a classic description of Bigfoot. Big black eyes, large flat nose, dark skinned with blackish grayish hair. I could see only a hint of a conical skull. Really based on nothing in particular, I feel like I saw a female. Not sure why, I just do. Anyway, it peeked back and forth twice. The eyes were mesmerizing, that's the best way to describe it. They felt like they were looking right through my soul. I wasn't scared really, but I was definitely in shock, like the way seeing a car accident feels like everything is in slow motion. And let me confirm what others say, there was no way I had the wherewithal to pull out my phone and take a picture. No way, I was totally engrossed in the moment. This was all in the space of maybe 20-30 seconds. The second time it peeked out, it looked at me for a few seconds, then ducked back behind the tree, but also sank like it was going onto the ground. That was the last I saw of it. My girlfriend finally finished, and when she came back toward me, that was when the fear hit me. Not like I was in danger right at that moment, but more like the reality of what I saw finally hit me. I quickly took her hand and pulled her back onto the trail. I didn't say what I saw, but I said we had to go back a S.A.P. She was confused, but I explained to her what I saw as we walked back at a much brisker pace than when we came up. She believed me. She's Canadian and has an uncle and cousin who claimed to see one when she was growing up, so that was good. She actually wanted to turn around and see if we could find it, but I wasn't quite in that space just after it happened. I do say I was generally a Bigfoot believer before this, but not anywhere near a fanatic or anything, and it's not like I set out looking for anything. I know people argue that if you have Bigfoot on the brain, you're more likely to jump to that conclusion in certain situations. I did not. In fact, the whole hike, I was complaining to my girlfriend about my manager at work. Bigfoot was the last thing on my mind. I'm okay with what happened, but I had strange dreams for weeks after. My girlfriend thought it was a great story and she'd tell her friends over beers and stuff, but I'm not entirely comfortable with people knowing. But like I said, I'm far away from it now to at least share it here. Yeah, it's possible a huge guy in a suit was out there at that exact time and in that exact spot, but I don't think so. I'm 99% sure I saw a Sasquatch. I have heard of and seen reptoid beings in the area 5 miles east of Phoenix, Arizona. The Superstition Mountain has been an area of encounters and is said to have both an alien base and laboratories under it. The military also has an underground base there and interacts and experiments with the aliens. About 20 years ago, I encountered an individual that spent time exploring some of the old mines in the area. He had vanished for months before I ran into him again. I asked him where he had been all this time. Here is his story. He spotted a mine entrance on the west side of the main mount side. He said that the mine looked to be in good shape, so he started walking in the shaft. He had gone about a half mile in when he saw a sign that said no entrance beyond this point. The mine shaft was still in good shape, so he went in 100 yards. He told me that people seemed to come out of the walls of the shaft. Men in black uniforms questioned him, and then took him to a holding area in Mesa, Arizona for 72 hours. They questioned him again and found out that his home was in Colorado. They gave him a plane ticket to Denver, Colorado, and told him never to come back to the Phoenix area. He asked me not to tell anyone that I had seen him. He wanted to pick up personal items that got left behind. I have never seen him after that. There are other stories of treasure hunters going into old mine shafts and finding holographic walls in the shaft. They did not try to enter the area behind the wall as they feared that they might not be able to get back out. They told me that they took a round rock and rolled it through the screen and heard it roll for some distance. One of them reached through the screen with a flashlight in his hand. He turned the flashlight back toward the screen, but could not see any light. He said that he withdrew his arm as he had the feeling that something was back there, and he didn't want it to grab his arm and drag him in. I asked the men to take me up there and show me the mine. They all said no way they were going back in there. We got a topo map out, and they showed me the area where they had encountered the wall. I did go into the area to search, but was never able to find the mine. This is not strange, as other people have found an opening and marked the entrance with a pyramid of large rocks and left to get lights and more people and equipment. When they got back, the rocks were still there as they had stacked them, but the entrance is gone. There have been sightings of reptoids about 9 feet tall in that area. As soon as they sense that they are being watched, they vanish. People have also seen lizard beings about the size of a man with bat-like wings and a tail. They fly out to the opening in the cliffs at twilight and also vanish since they are being watched. The Native Americans have seen these things for hundreds of years and have legends about them. They say that they are shapeshifters and can make you see them in any form they want. I found this out on a personal encounter with a reptoid I encountered on a trail. As I was walking up an inner trail in the MTS, I looked up and saw a man coming towards me on the trail. He had appeared out of thin air. As I walked toward him, I noticed his eyes. They were reptoid, vertical slits. When he sensed that I knew what he was, he hit me with a psychic blow that I can only describe as being hit in the head with a sledgehammer. It stunned me and almost drove me to my knees. As I shook this off, I looked up and he was gone. I had a headache for 2 days after that and think that he could have killed me if he wanted to. This is just some of the strange things that have been seen up there. We have seen different types of alien craft that appear to enter the main mount, ghost orbs and UFO orbs that have been seen in different areas for hundreds of years that disappear at different old mines and wells, and some just enter the face of the MTS. I would love to get in touch with a well-equipped investigative group and have them check out some of the strong magnetic fields that may act as dimensional portholes where some of these creatures come and go. The fact that the encounter in Missouri was in a Navy storage area is no surprise. They have been given reign over housing UFOs and aliens since the formation of MJ-12 after the Roswell crash. One day our government may tell us the truth on their involvement with alien encounters and tech that has been traded for their abduction of us. First off, I would like to say I am not sure what these things are. All of this is 100% true. My dad and brother have lake houses right next to each other in upstate New York on Lake Ontario. They are in a very secluded area on a peninsula. You can only get there by boat or by walking down a mile-long path deep through a forest. One winter morning, we were all getting ready to go out and play after a night of heavy snowfall. My uncle looked out the window toward the path we used to get back and forth from the parking lot to our houses. As he looked out, he saw a pair of the eeriest, strangest-looking deer he or I had ever seen. They had all gray fur, long dark almond-shaped eyes that stared intently, and their antlers were two long jagged horns protruding straight out from their skull. These deer were like none either of us had seen. My grandmother walked outside to take pictures of them. After she snapped a few pictures, they seemed to just walk away. The two deer silently strolled into the woods, not making a single sound. They did not even have to hop the slightest bit through the foot of snow on the ground. What makes this even weirder and actually startling has to do with the pictures. After looking back, neither of the deer showed up in any of the pictures taken. The camera was fine, as everything but where the deer were standing was clearly photographed. Even what was behind the deer showed up in the photos. When we walked over to where they had been walking, no more snow had fallen. This was a minute or two after they walked away. No tracks were found. The snow appeared untouched. I know this story isn't exactly scary, but it is intriguing and a strange mystery. A few years later, my cousins and I were walking down the path. We all have a strange feeling I can only describe as dread. It was like the feeling you get when you are sitting outside the principal's office waiting to be called in. We looked over and saw two deer just like the ones before. The forest floor around the path was covered in leaves and dry brush, but we did not hear them walking around. The two deer were pacing, watching us. At least that's how I felt at the time and still feel to this day. The deer turned their heads simultaneously the second we looked at them. We exchanged excruciating eye contact for around 10 seconds or so. It could have been longer for all I know. It just felt so odd. Then they proceeded to walk over a hill out of sight. We did not hear them walk away. It's like they float above the ground. This was in the early 2000s, and they have not been seen since. This is still a topic of conversation for our family to this day. Also, there are many other creepier things that I have seen up at our lake house if anyone is interested. We still talk about it. I've been reading about the Glimmer Man phenomenon and its similarity to the cloaked alien in the Predator film series. I saw something very similar a few years ago. It was probably about 4 years ago. I lived in the very northern part of Frederick County, Maryland, near Thurmont, not too far south of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Behind my house was a few acres of woods with a small creek right past the tree line. We had about 2 acres of lawn before the woods started. This area of Frederick County is very rural, with lots of forests and farms, very near Cunningham Falls State Park, a huge wooded area with lakes and the tallest waterfall in the state. In fact, Camp David is located in the area. Anyway, I was sitting on my second-story back deck and noticed movement in the tree line. It was a nice day, I think early fall. It was not a hot day and not raining. I saw the outline of something big moving perpendicular away from me in the woods. It was a shimmer, like heat waves, completely invisible, except you can see the air being displaced, and made me think of the Predator right away because it was just like heat waves rising from a hot surface. It seemed to be a humanoid shape in that it was taller than wide, like a tall, fit, bipedal outline. It was hard to judge the height from my perspective and the distance, but it was taller than the average man, probably about 10 feet tall at least. I never heard of someone else seeing something similar before. I only saw it once, and that was enough for me. The heavy rain drummed against the metal roof of the ranger station, its relentless rhythm matching the unease that had settled deep in my gut. My name is Eric Monroe, and I've been a ranger in the Tongass National Forest for nearly a decade. At 36, I thought I'd seen it all. Grizzly bears straying too close to campsites, illegal poachers lurking in the shadows, and storms so fierce they made the trees bow to the wind. But nothing prepared me for the events that unfolded that summer. I wasn't your stereotypical park ranger. Sure, I wore the green uniform and patrolled the trails, but I had always been more interested in the forest's secrets than its scenery. A lifetime ago, I studied environmental science at the University of Washington, driven by a fascination with ecosystems. But something had pulled me here, to this isolated stretch of Alaskan wilderness, as if the forest itself had secrets it wanted me to uncover. I'm 6'2" with a lean build hardened by years of hiking rugged terrain, my dark brown hair streaked prematurely with gray. My colleagues often teased me about my intensity, about the way I studied old legends with the same vigor I used to monitor wildlife migration patterns. It was a quiet Wednesday in late July when the first sign of trouble arrived. I was seated at my desk, filling out a routine report on trail maintenance, when I heard the unmistakable hum of a helicopter. Not just any helicopter, though. A sleek, black model that screamed government. It hovered over the treetops before descending onto the helipad near the edge of the station. I stepped outside, shielding my eyes from the rain as two men in dark suits climbed out, their expressions as grim as the storm clouds above. Ranger Monroe, one of them asked. His voice was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. He didn't wait for my answer before continuing. We're with the Department of Interior. We need to speak with you immediately. The other man, shorter and broader, scanned the area as if expecting trouble. I gestured for them to follow me inside. The station wasn't much. Just a single room with a desk, a radio, and a cot in the corner. But it was enough to offer some reprieve from the rain. What's this about? I asked, leaning against the desk. The taller man opened a slim black folder and handed me a grainy photograph. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. The image showed a clearing in the forest, but the ground was torn up as if something massive had crashed through. Trees lay splintered, their trunks snapped like matchsticks. And in the center of it all was a footprint. A single, enormous print embedded deep in the mud. What the hell is this? I asked, my voice low. That's what we're trying to determine, the shorter man said. We have reason to believe there's something in this forest, something unusual. We need your cooperation, Ranger Monroe. This stays classified. Classified. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard whispers before, rumors passed around campfires and ranger stations about strange sightings, about people disappearing in the woods. But I'd always chalked it up to superstition or overactive imaginations. You're not telling me everything, I said, handing the photograph back. The taller man allowed himself the faintest of smiles. You're right. But for now, all you need to know is that this is a matter of national security. We'll be conducting our investigation, and y'all continue your duties as usual. Understood? I nodded reluctantly, though my mind raced with questions. As they left, I stood at the window, watching the helicopter disappear into the mist. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than me. Bigger than anything I'd ever encountered in this forest. But the forest, as I would soon learn, had its own way of revealing the truth. And sometimes, that truth was far more terrifying than the lies. The following days were unusually quiet, though the silence felt like a coiled spring waiting to snap. I kept to my usual rounds, walking trails and checking for signs of erosion or stray campers. But my thoughts kept circling back to that photograph. The footprint. The agents. The way they'd left without offering any real answers. 2 days later, the first incident occurred. I was on the South Ridge Trail, a secluded path rarely visited by hikers, when I found the campsite. At least, it had been a campsite. The tent was shredded, its nylon fabric hanging from broken poles like flayed skin. A backpack lay nearby, its contents strewn across the clearing. Clothes, food wrappers, a flashlight with a cracked lens. And then there were the claw marks. They raked across the tree trunks in long, parallel lines, each groove at least 2 inches deep. My first thought was a bear, but the spacing was too wide, the marks too clean. Bears don't leave symmetrical patterns like that. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the oppressive quiet. No answer. Just the whisper of wind through the trees. My hand went to the radio clipped to my belt. "Base, this is Monroe. I've got a disturbed campsite on the South Ridge Trail. No sign of the occupants." There was a pause before Marie, the station's dispatcher, answered. "Copy that, Eric. Should I send backup?" I hesitated. Something about the scene felt wrong, but I couldn't explain why. "Not yet. I'll take a closer look first." I crouched near the remains of the tent, scanning for any clues. That's when I saw the footprints. Human footprints. Bare from the look of it. Leading away from the campsite. They were deep, the stride uneven, as if the person had been running. I followed them for about 20 yards before they stopped abruptly, vanishing into the underbrush. "Marie, I might need that backup after all," I said into the radio. But before she could respond, I heard it. A low growl that froze me in place. It came from somewhere to my left, just beyond the tree line. Slowly, I turned, my hand instinctively going to the hunting knife strapped to my hip. "Who's there?" I called out, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. The growl came again, deeper this time, vibrating through the air. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned the shadows, and then I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a hulking mass that moved with an unnatural grace. It stepped into the clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. The creature stood on two legs, towering at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in coarse black fur. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its mouth was lined with teeth far too sharp and numerous for any animal I'd ever seen. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I could recognize. The creature let out a piercing howl that sent birds exploding from the trees above. My instincts took over, and I ran, sprinting back toward the trailhead as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, the sound growing louder, closer. When I finally burst onto the main trail, the noises stopped. I turned, knife in hand, but the creature was gone. The forest was silent once more, as if nothing had happened. "Eric, are you there?" Mary's voice crackled through the radio, pulling me back to reality. "I'm here," I panted, trying to steady my breathing. "Send backup now, and call those agents." Whatever was out here, it wasn't just a story. And it wasn't done with me yet. By the time the backup arrived, the forest had swallowed any evidence of the creature. 2 rangers, Sarah Delaney and Travis Cole, stepped out of their truck, their faces set with grim determination. Sarah, in her late 30s, was wiry but tough, her sharp green eyes missing nothing. Travis was bulkier, with a quiet demeanor that often made people underestimate his quick thinking. I told them what I'd seen, though I could tell they didn't believe me entirely. An 8-foot-tall creature with glowing eyes. "Eric, are you sure it wasn't a bear?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. I ran a hand through my hair, still damp with sweat. "I know what I saw, Sarah. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't normal." Travis glanced at the claw marks on the trees, his expression unreadable. "We'll do a sweep of the area, see if we can find anything," he said. "You should head back to the station, get some rest." "I'm not leaving," I said firmly. "Whatever's out here, it's dangerous. I'm not letting you two go after it alone." Sarah sighed but didn't argue. Together, the 3 of us began to comb the surrounding forest, our flashlights cutting through the deepening twilight. The forest felt different now, its usual serenity replaced by an oppressive weight. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. After an hour of searching, we found another clue. A patch of ground near the creek had been disturbed, the dirt churned up as if something massive had passed through. In the center was another footprint, larger than the one in the photograph, its edges pressed deep into the soil. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, crouching to examine it. "What could make a print this size?" Travis didn't answer. He was staring at something just beyond the creek, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. Hanging from a low tree branch was a deer carcass, its body mangled beyond recognition. Deep gashes ran across its flank, and its head lolled at an unnatural angle. The blood was still fresh, pooling on the ground beneath it. "Whatever did this isn't far," Travis said quietly. "We need to call this in," Sarah said, already reaching for her radio. Before she could speak, a deafening roar echoed through the trees. It was closer now, the sound vibrating in my chest like a physical force. My grip tightened on my flashlight as I scanned the shadows, trying to pinpoint the source. "Everyone stay close," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The roar came again, followed by the sound of snapping branches. And then it appeared. The creature emerged from the darkness, its massive frame blocking out the faint light of the setting sun. Its eyes glowed like burning coals, locking onto us with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Sarah toward the trail. We bolted, the creature's thunderous steps shaking the ground behind us. My lungs burned as we sprinted through the forest, the beams of our flashlights bouncing wildly. I could hear its ragged breathing, feel the weight of its gaze on my back. We burst into a clearing where the backup truck was parked. Travis scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys as Sarah and I piled into the cab. The engine roared to life, and we sped down the dirt road, the creature's silhouette growing smaller in the rearview mirror. No one spoke as we drove back to the station. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a creeping dread. This thing wasn't just an animal. It was hunting us. And I had the sinking feeling that it wasn't done. Back at the station, Sarah finally broke the silence. "We need to get those agents back here. Whatever this is, it's beyond us." I nodded, already reaching for the landline. But as I dialed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of whatever was lurking in the Tongass. The agents didn't waste time. Less than 2 hours after my call, their black helicopter descended onto the station's helipad, its powerful blades kicking up a storm of rain and pine needles. This time, they brought reinforcements. 4 additional men, all in tactical gear, their faces grim beneath the shadow of their helmets. The taller agent, whom I'd come to know as Agent Driscoll, didn't bother with pleasantries. "Where did you see it last?" he demanded, his voice sharp and businesslike. "South Ridge Trail," I said, barely concealing my frustration. "But it's not just there. This thing moves fast, and it's smart. It's hunting." Driscoll exchanged a look with his partner, Agent Carter, the shorter, stockier man who'd done most of the talking during their first visit. Carter nodded, then turned to address the Rangers. "This is now a classified operation. You 3 will remain here at the station. Do not interfere." "Excuse me," Sarah snapped, stepping forward. "We've been patrolling these woods for years. If you think you can just push us aside." Driscoll cut her off with a steely glare. "This isn't a negotiation, Ranger Delaney. Stay here." I placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, pulling her back. "Let them go," I said quietly. "If they think they can handle this, fine. But we're not just sitting here waiting for answers." The agents moved quickly, fanning out into the forest with their heavily armed team. Their radios crackled with updates as they disappeared into the trees, leaving the 3 of us standing in tense silence. "They don't know what they are dealing with," Sarah muttered, pacing the length of the room. "Of course they don't," Travis said, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. "But something tells me they've seen this before. Maybe not here, but somewhere." That thought sat heavy in the air. The idea that this creature wasn't unique, that there could be others like it out there, was almost too much to process. Hours passed with no word from the agents. Outside, the rain had eased, but the oppressive weight of the forest remained. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness, every shadow a potential threat, and then the screaming started. It came through the radio first. A burst of static, followed by a panicked voice. "It's here, flanking us from the east." Oh God, it's the transmission cut out, replaced by a sickening roar that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed the radio, my knuckles white. "Driscoll, Carter, do you copy?" Nothing. Just static. Sarah and Travis were already grabbing their gear. "We can't just sit here," Travis said, his calm demeanor cracking under the strain. "We don't have a choice," I said, though I was already strapping on my utility belt. "But if we go out there, we stick together. No heroics." The 3 of us moved quickly, following the agent's path into the forest. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. Our flashlights carved narrow beams through the darkness, but they only served to remind us how little we could see. We found the first body near the creek. It was one of the agents, his tactical gear shredded, his lifeless eyes staring up at the canopy. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth, but I forced myself to look closer. Deep gashes ran across his torso, the wounds too precise to be the work of any animal. "Eric," Travis whispered, his voice trembling. "Over here." I turned to see him pointing at something half buried in the mud. It was another footprint, larger than the last, but this time there was something else. A second set of prints, smaller but equally disturbing. Whatever we were dealing with wasn't alone. A low growl cut through the air, freezing us in place. It was close, too close. My heart pounded as I scanned the shadows, knife in hand. Then it stepped into the clearing. No, they stepped into the clearing. Two creatures, each more monstrous than the last. Their glowing eyes locked onto us, their movements deliberate, almost calculating. "Run," I whispered. But before we could move, the creatures charged. The world became a blur of sound and motion as the creatures lunged toward us. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her into the trees, Travis close behind. The undergrowth clawed at us as we ran, the creaturous roars vibrating through the air like an oncoming storm. "Split up," Travis shouted, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my own heartbeat. "No," I yelled back. "We stay together. They'll pick us off if we don't." Sarah's flashlight bobbed wildly as she turned, her green eyes wide with fear. "We can't outrun them. We need to find cover." Ahead of us, the forest opened into a narrow ravine. Without thinking, I led us down the incline, the slippery ground threatening to take us all down with it. The roar of a creek grew louder as we stumbled onto the rocky shore. The water rushed past us, icy and relentless, and for a fleeting moment, I thought it might drown out the sounds of pursuit. But then they appeared at the top of the ridge. Two dark silhouettes, their glowing eyes piercing through the gloom. They didn't hesitate. They leapt down, their massive bodies landing with sickening force mere yards away. "Into the water," I shouted, knowing it was our only chance. We plunged into the freezing creek, the current tugging at our legs as we fought to keep our footing. The creatures hesitated for the first time, their glowing eyes tracking our every move from the shore. One of them let out a low growl, a sound that was almost frustrated. "They don't like the water," Travis said, his voice shaking. "Why don't they like the water?" "I don't care," I said, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "As long as it keeps them back." But the creatures didn't retreat. Instead, they began to pace along the edge of the creek, their glowing eyes never leaving us. It was as if they were waiting, calculating. Sarah gripped my arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eric, look." I followed her gaze upstream. Something was floating in the water, carried by the current. At first, I thought it was debris. A broken branch, maybe. But as it drew closer, I realized it was a body. One of the agents, his lifeless form spinning slowly in the current. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through me, but there was no time to dwell on it. The creatures let out another roar, this one deeper, more deep. They were growing impatient. "We can't stay here," Travis said, his voice low. "If they figure out how to get to us." "They won't have to," I interrupted, pointing downstream. The creek widened there, its waters slowing as it merged with a larger river. The creatures would have an easier time crossing. "Then we move now," Sarah said, her voice hard with determination. We waded down the creek, the icy water numbing my legs as the current pushed against us. The creatures followed along the shore, their movements eerily silent now. Every step felt like a gamble, every breath a stolen moment. We reached a bend in the creek where the bank rose into a steep embankment. Beyond it, I could see the faint glow of headlights. The agents' vehicles, abandoned but still powered. Hope flickered in my chest, but it was fleeting. A sound behind me made me turn. One of the creatures was in the water now, its massive frame cutting through the current with terrifying ease. The other remained on the shore, its glowing eyes locked on us as if ensuring we had nowhere to go. "Go!" I shouted, shoving Sarah and Travis toward the embankment. We scrambled up the muddy slope, slipping and clawing at roots and rocks. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but the thought of those creatures kept me moving. When we finally reached the top, I turned to look back. The creature in the water had stopped, its head tilted as if listening. Then, with a snarl, it retreated to the shore. "What's it doing?" Travis asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, but the unease in my gut told me this wasn't over. We reached the agents' vehicles and found one of them still functional. The keys were in the ignition, the engine humming softly. Without hesitation, I climbed into the driver's seat, Sarah and Travis piling in beside me. As I drove away, the creatures watched us from the tree line, their glowing eyes disappearing into the darkness. Whatever game they were playing, it wasn't finished. "We need to report this," Sarah said, her voice tight. "To who?" Travis asked bitterly. "You saw those agents. They knew. They knew, and they didn't tell us." The car fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on us. The creatures weren't just a threat. They were a secret. And someone, somewhere, wanted to keep it that way. The ranger station looked different as we pulled up. Emptier, colder, and somehow smaller. The faint morning light was creeping through the dense forest, yet it brought no comfort. Everything felt wrong. The drive back had been silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of branches in the distance, sounds that set my nerves on edge. Sarah was the first to speak as we stepped inside, her voice shaking. "We can't stay here. Those things, they'll find us." "Where else would we go?" Travis snapped, throwing his pack onto the table. His face was pale, his usual calm replaced by an almost feral fear. "It's not like we can just run into town and tell people. They won't believe us. Hell, I don't even know if I believe it." "People will believe us if they see the evidence," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I walked to the desk and pulled out the station's camera, the one we used to document wildlife. The memory card inside held the images of the creature's footprints and the bloodied aftermath of the agent's mission. "We have this." Sarah crossed her arms. "And what if whoever sent those agents comes looking for us? They clearly don't want this getting out. We could be putting a target on our backs." "Better a target on our backs than letting those things roam free," I said firmly. "Whatever they are not just animals. They're dangerous, and someone's been covering for them. If we don't speak up, no one will." The room fell into a tense silence. Sarah sat heavily on the couch, her head in her hands. Travis stared out the window, his jaw clenched. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on all of us. Then, the phone rang. We all froze. No one moved, no one breathed. The old landline hadn't rung once in the years ID worked at the station. Most calls went straight to the radio or our cell phones. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice spoke. It was calm, measured, and chillingly familiar. "Ranger Whitaker, this is Agent Carter." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" "You need to stop," Carter said, his tone as neutral as ever. "I know what you're thinking, and I'm telling you now. It's a mistake. For your safety and the safety of your colleagues, you need to forget what you've seen." "Forget," I snapped, anger bubbling to the surface. "You sent us into this mess, and now you want us to just ignore it. People are dead, Carter. Those things are out there killing, and you want us to let it slide." Carter sighed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "It's bigger than you, Whitaker. Bigger than all of us. You don't understand what's at stake. Trust me when I say this. If you try to expose this, it won't just be the creatures y'all need to worry about." The line went dead. I slammed the receiver down, my hands shaking with a mix of fear and rage. They're trying to silence us. "No kidding," Travis muttered, his eyes wide. That was a threat if I've ever heard one. "We need to leave," Sarah said again, standing. Her voice was stronger now, more resolute. "If they are watching us, and they probably are, we're sitting ducks here. We need to get somewhere safe, somewhere we can figure out our next move." I nodded, grabbing the camera and stuffing it into my pack. "We'll head to Juneau." It's big enough to lose ourselves in for a while, and we can use the public library to upload the photos online. Once the truth is out, they can't stop it. The plan was hasty, desperate, but it was all we had. We packed quickly, keeping an ear out for any sounds outside the station. My gut told me we didn't have much time. As we piled into the truck, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The creatures were still out there, and so were the people protecting them. But we had the evidence, and we had each other. The road stretched ahead, winding through the endless trees. The forest felt alive, watching us, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Not just by the creatures, but by something even more insidious. "Do you think this will work?" Sarah asked as we drove, her voice soft but edged with hope. I glanced at her, then at Travis in the back seat. They were scared, yes, but they were still here, still fighting. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's a start." As the forest thinned and the faint lights of civilization appeared on the horizon, I realized this was far from over. The creatures weren't folklore, and the government wasn't just complicit. They were orchestrating something bigger than we could comprehend, and we were just scratching the surface.
Hello everyone, I'm George and I'm going to narrate few episodes of Nightmare Hours. If you like my voice, do write in the comments below. So this is my dogman sighting. On July 4th, 2012 at 2 p.m., I saw a dogman cross my path in front of my bicycle. This beast was only 4 feet away from me. Its snout was over a foot long with absolutely ferocious teeth. Where we typically have whites in the eyes, this one had yellow. The inner part of the eye was green and had a very piercing appearance. I would approximate this animal's weight to be about 220 pounds. This isn't late-night hikers. It was my mom taking 6-year-old me for a walk while we were camping in Washington back in the late 80s. We were Canadians on vacation and didn't know the area. It was just us, walking along the banks of the river at dusk and playing in the trees when I remember starting to feel weird, like someone was following us. I thought maybe my dad was playing games with us. Except it was pretty clear my mom felt the same way, because she started hissing at me to walk faster and be quiet. The feeling got stronger and stronger, and then I felt my mom grab my hand and tell me to run. We just kept running until we hit a road and flagged down a car who took this petrified mother and daughter to their campground. The name of the river, the Green River. They found another victim of the Green River killer Gary Ridgway a few weeks later in the area where we were exploring. It has ruined my ability to walk through the woods by myself. A couple of years back, I found myself on a solo hunting trip in South Texas. The sun dipped low in the sky as I settled into my deer blind, surrounded by the rustling leaves and distant calls of the wild. Little did I know that the tranquility of the moment was about to be shattered. As I peered through the camouflage of the blind, scanning the landscape for any sign of movement, my heart skipped a beat. In the distance, I spotted a group of figures navigating through the rugged terrain. Fear gripped me when I noticed a leader at the front, carrying a rifle. It didn't take long to realize that these were Mexican immigrants crossing our property. Chilled by the stories I had heard about hunters in the same county facing robbery or worse at the hands of such groups, panic set in. The woods suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a potential danger zone. I could almost hear the tales echoing in my mind as I contemplated the best course of action. I decided to hunker down, lowering myself onto the floor of the deer blind. The brush around me provided some cover, and I tried to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. My breaths became shallow, and every creak of the blind seemed deafening. The quietness of the forest was now an eerie symphony, each rustle making me flinch. Time seemed to crawl as I lay there, my senses on high alert. The distant footsteps drew nearer, and the leader's silhouette became clearer against the fading daylight. My pulse quickened, and beads of sweat formed on my forehead as I prayed they wouldn't come too close. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. a silent observer hidden among the trees. The fear of the unknown, fueled by the stories I'd heard, made the experience all the more nerve-wracking. It was a test of my instincts, a battle between rationality and the primal fear that coursed through my veins. Eventually, the group passed by without incident. The weight of relief was palpable as I watched them disappear into the wilderness. I stayed put, allowing the echoes of their footsteps to fade before cautiously emerging from my hiding spot. I was walking out of the woods one night with my bow and my tree stand on my back. I kept hearing something walking behind me, and when I would stop, it would stop. I would start walking, and so would it. I kept turning around and looking with my flashlight, but couldn't see anything. I got freaked out and started running. It started running as well. I'm literally on the verge of having a heart attack when I realized it was my tree stand strap, dragging the ground about 15 feet behind me. Seasons never change high enough above the snow line in this land of endless forests and shrouds of drifting mist. I've hunted here on my people's traditional land with my father and with the ghosts of my ancestors. Guided and knowing my path, I call myself a man. But to those whose forest this is, I am animal friend. It was a day when the dark green shadow of the mountain held a bridal veil of pure white clouds. Old Raven was calling to me, asking for crumbs from my sandwich. That is the last moment of my life when I was at peace. Many seekers of Skookum come here. They think they will find evidence of Bigfoot while they camp, hide camera traps, and hike a few miles into the ancient forests. I know Skookum, and it takes a lifetime of understanding and growth. Not just a 4-day hiking holiday and some amateur knowledge. There is a dark side to Bigfoot searches. Not all of those who track him are without knowledge. There is Silent Owl, a fallen medicine healer whose family died a few years ago during the plague that swept through our homes. His ways have changed. He will not use his magic to heal. The Skookum in his eyes has grown cruel and broken. So when the hunters came and asked me if I was Joseph Pale, I told them I would not help them find Bigfoot, for it was their intention to shoot the legendary beast and become famous. I told them, Bigfoot is not an animal. He is like a man, peaceful and considerate, unless you are trespassing and planning to hurt his family. I will not help you, and I'd suggest you turn around. I thought that would be the end of it. They could go into the woods with their rifles, and they would find nothing but the ranger waiting to check their hunting permits. I doubted such men could even find an elk, let alone Bigfoot. They had no Skookum, judging by their oversized rifles. I will help you, but not for less than double what you offered, little fox. If he has said no, it now costs double. The chilling and calloused voice of Silent Owl spoke from my shadow, where he had walked over from the lodge to see what the hunters wanted from me. Well, all right. The hunter who looked like Matthew McConaughey said. The others whooped with excitement. We're gonna go bag ourselves a creature that doesn't even exist. Silent Owl took their money and went with them. I was horrified. The thought of Silent Owl leading them to the sacred lands, set aside for the forest people since the beginning of creation, was appalling and grotesque. I sat for a long time, feeling great woe and horror, knowing of the violation that those men planned to commit. My Skookum grew weak inside me, and in its place rose up fear. I was truly afraid to do nothing, afraid of what would happen, afraid on behalf of the peaceful and unsuspecting Bigfoot families that Silent Owl had betrayed. I resolved to go and to try and help them, to protect them if necessary. I am not a hunter of men, and the thought of turning my compound bow on a person and silently assassinating him frightened me. I was not sure where such a thought came from, but I could imagine having Silent Owl in my sights and putting an end to their expedition in just one shot. They might shoot back, but I would be long gone. I trembled, afraid of the consequences of murder, but I also realized I must be willing to do anything, or there was no point in going after them. I went home and called my dogs from the woods, Spritzer and Chief. They came to me, wagging their tails, and they sniffed my hands and sensed I was about to go on a big hunt. Spritzer growled. He didn't like my fear, but he obeyed me and got into the back of my truck. Chief seemed nervous, following me around while I packed. When I had my backpack ready, I took up my compound bow, a .36 caliber revolver, my hunting knife, and a survival hatchet. I loaded my truck with extra fuel and water and food for my dogs. For a long moment, I sat in the cab, in the muddy driveway of my trailer. It was a decision I had to choose to make. I could stop and do nothing, or I could take the warpath. We were soon off the highway and driving up an old dirt logging road, partially overgrown. I stopped at the creek and got out. We hiked the rest of the way up to where the road ends, and there we found the pickup that belonged to Matthew McConaughey and his buddies, and it was empty. They had already set out on foot up into the mountains. They had about 6 miles to hike before they were even at the edge of Bigfoot's territory. I followed them, with fear of what they planned to do and fear of what I planned to do weighing in my mind. Old Raven found me and asked me, "Where are you going?" I ignored the creature and led my dogs. It grows dark in the forest before it is night, and I saw the campfire of Matthew McConaughey's hunting party, and I stopped and set up a cold camp. I fed my dogs and slept little, listening to the darkness and hearing the voices of the men as they bragged loudly. In the morning I waited until they left. I could have shot an arrow into Silent Owl, but I was too afraid. We came to their camp and I finished putting out their fire. The dripping pines weren't in danger of burning, but it annoyed me that they had littered and left their campfire smoking. My dogs sniffed everywhere, sensing that we were hunting these men. They looked at me questioningly and I said, "I don't know either. I know this is strange, but I don't know how to turn back." When we reached the quiet mountain meadow where my grandfather had seen Bigfoot, I realized we were crossing the threshold. There was no turning back. We were entering into another world, an older and more civilized world. In this place, there was a balance between man and nature, and man wanted for nothing. They were hidden here, unseen by the cold and calculating eyes of science. I followed the tracks of the hunters easily, seeing how they blundered through the grass and bushes. The trees shed their dew like a soft rain, and birds who had never seen humans called to each other for the curious gossip of newcomers. I caught up to them and waited some distance away, crouching down and hidden. I thought to myself that if I was going to fire an arrow and put an end to this, that now would be the right time. All I could think about was them shooting back at me, chasing me, hunting me. I was frozen in fear, unable to take action. My dogs were growling softly as they too waited to strike. The hunting party moved on and I followed them. We began to climb the side of the mountain, and I realized with anxiety that by now, Bigfoot would know we were here. It occurred to me that I didn't need to do anything if Bigfoot was disturbed by the intrusion. Bigfoot had great skookum, and he could fend for himself. I had told myself this and used it as an excuse to abandon my foolish pursuit of the hunters. Both of my opportunities to fire an arrow and end Silent Owl's betrayal had resulted in me paralyzed by fear. I knew I would do nothing. There was no point in me trying. So I told myself to let Bigfoot defend his own lands and to turn back. That is when things became terrifying. My dogs smelled something in the air they didn't like. Their loyalty to me shattered as I told them to stop and to stay, but they ran away, whimpering in terror. I turned and soon I could smell Bigfoot like rancid swamp water. The foul wind turned my stomach and drove a primal fear into me like a thorn. I looked up, my eyes watering, and saw a blurry image of one great hand curled around a tree at a monstrous height. The angry eyes, almost human, peered out at me from behind the wood. I shook and stood frozen, looking back at it. There was a low growl from the creature, and then it called out in a voice that was too much like the howl of a man. I fell to my knees and dropped my weapon. I put up my hands, covering my head. I looked down from it, my instincts commanding my movements. I wanted to survive, and I could sense its rage and its hostility. I prayed, my lips murmuring, "Great Spirit, please show me as animal friend. I meant no harm coming here, forgive me. Teach this son of the forest I am not its enemy. Put compassion in its heart." Bigfoot looked at me and heard my frightened whimpering. It stared down on me for a long time, breathing heavily. It belted an enraged roar, but it did not lift me or harm me. I shook with terror, fearing for my life. Then the ground shook as it stomped away and left me there. My legs were shaking as I tried to stand, but my fear had overwhelmed me. I fell down, alone without my dogs, and lay staring up into the lit green canopy. I took a long time, but my skookum gradually built up inside me, and I decided to follow Bigfoot. I knew that if it thought I was an enemy, I would already be dead. On the ridge I saw the hunters. They had found Bigfoot tracks and were following them. The one who looked and sounded exactly like Matthew McConaughey was in the lead. Silent Owl was behind them. He was looking around, sensing that some hidden danger had him in their sights. This time I let my arrow fly. Silent Owl fell from the ridge, and the other hunters did not notice until he had plummeted to his death. I felt sorrow for my actions, but I knew it was just. He had led the hunters to Bigfoot, and in doing so, he had begun the killing that was to follow. Forgive me, brother. May you find peace with your loved ones on the other side. I spoke on behalf of Silent Owl, hoping that he would find forgiveness in death and be reunited with his family. For the hunters, death was not so kind or gentle. They found Bigfoot, or rather, a band of 4 younger male Bigfoot found them. They were in a savage mood, having watched all the females and children of their tribe flee in terror. The older male Bigfoot had gone too. I called out a warning, hoping they would run for their lives. I'd watched the Bigfoot flee before the hunters could find them, vanishing into the forest from the open mountain meadows below. The hunters looked to my position on the ridge, having heard my warning cry. One of them used his rifle scope to identify me. For a split second I thought I'd be shot, but they knew nothing of my fault in Silent Owl's death. They never climbed down to his body to see the broken arrow. Then the Bigfoot attacked. Their first assault was a test of the strength of the intruders. They didn't kill any of them, but they left injuries and terror on the faces of the hunters. They fired their rifles at close range, but managed to miss with every shot. When the Bigfoot retreated, the hunters were too terrified to continue, all except Matthew McConaughey. I followed him as he set out alone, deep into Bigfoot territory. He was determined to slay Bigfoot and would not back down from their guerrilla antics. We came to a part of the forest that was very old, and great boulders were all that remained of some primeval mountain. Beneath the boulders were shallow caves. Each cave had the skeletal remains of a Bigfoot. We had entered their burial ground. Every Bigfoot that had ever died was brought to this place for countless generations, going back to the very first day. I shuddered in dread of what the spirits would think of me for entering such a sacred place without rite, without tribute. I took one last candid look at Matthew McConaughey where he was crouched and handling the skull of Bigfoot. I left him there and went back the way I had come. As I wandered back through the forest, I found the first of the fleeing hunters. Bigfoot had broken his neck. I gasped in horror at the sight, but I left his remains there. I had my own skin to save, and I wasn't out of the woods yet. I found the second hunter dead as well. The Bigfoot had relentlessly pursued them and killed at least 2 of them. I felt dread as I realized the Bigfoot were close, and they were killing every man in sight. Would I be hunted down and brutally slaughtered? I heard gunshots in the distance. I knew the Bigfoot had found the last hunter. I moved on slowly and cautiously. Night was falling, and I felt trepidation at the thought of camping or wandering in the dark. I pressed on, almost to the creek. There I found the last of the hunters. They had torn him to pieces and scattered him all over the place. His rifle was twisted and smashed. I felt sick as the last light was fading. I knelt at the small waterfall and threw up. When I arose, my panic grew to screaming heights as I saw I was surrounded by angry Bigfoot. I knew it was about to be all over. They would descend on me and tear off my arms and bite through my neck. I cowed at the sight of them and again fell to my knees. They were closing in on me when I heard a loud and almost chuckling grunting noise. I looked up and saw the massive old Bigfoot I had first seen. He had come and seen me and was telling the others to let me go. The Bigfoot looked at their leader, and then they backed away from me and left me there, shaking in terror. I fled through the forest, following the creek until I came to the old logging road. I took one look at Matthew McConaughey's abandoned vehicle, and I knew it would stay there and rust. Nobody was coming back from the hunting party. I walked toward my own vehicle, and when I got there, I tossed my backpack into the back. Chief looked up at me and whined. He had hidden there, waiting for my return. I called a spritzer, but he never came. With my heart heavy at his disappearance, I drove us back to the highway and took us home. That night I sat with my hands shaking and my nerves frayed. I had survived, but my memories of what I had seen and how terrible it all was would linger in my mind forever. I would never have peace again. As I sat thinking about it, I wondered what had become of my other dog. Chief had come inside, having had enough of the woods. He sat miserable, missing his brother. As we sat staring at his empty place by the fire, I heard barking outside. I opened the door and there he was. Spritzer had traveled all night and somehow found his way home. I was overjoyed, and some part of me began to feel hope. I realized the Bigfoot would again know the peace and isolation they needed to survive. They had let me go because they are not monsters, and they forgave me. Spritzer's return home was like a sign that in the end, all would be well. Hello, I'm a bus driver in a small town in England, and I think I've just picked up a passenger's soul on my bus. This happened 2 nights ago. I've worked with this bus company for 1 and 2 years, and I have driven the same route for 3 years. Over this time, I have gotten regulars that I've come to know as I see them multiple times a day, some young and some old. I take them to work or to the shops and bingo. I often jump out to help my older passengers with their shopping and whatnot. I've had a passenger that I've taken for the full 3 years I've done this route. Let's call her Jane. Jane is an elderly lady who suffers from dementia. She was well functioning for the last 2.5 years, sometimes a little confused, but I was always patient and helped her however she needed. I used to pick her up from the bus stop right outside her house, literally a 10-second walk from her door to the bus stop. Every day, I'd take her from her house to the local shopping center where she played bingo with friends. However, her dementia worsened in the last 6 months after an incident on my bus where she got very confused and distressed. I had to stop my bus and try to settle her down. Someone on the bus knew her son, who thankfully worked close by and came over to help. I told my manager, who understood and approved, for my passengers to get off my bus and catch the next one just behind, so I could stay with Jane. Her son came, calmed her down, took her home, and thanked me for the help. We spoke about Jane, and I explained how we had become friendly over the last few years I had been on the route. I explained she hadn't freaked out like this before. He said he knew, and she spoke fondly of me. Her dementia had worsened, causing her to have bad spells. He took my number and said he would get in touch to arrange a gift for looking after Jane. I insisted it was okay and that I didn't want a gift, but he insisted. He took my number and his mother and left the bus. I never saw Jane again after that day, but I did see the son at the shops. He explained that Jane had gotten worse and unfortunately wasn't safe to leave the house. I thanked him for letting me know, wished her the best, and asked to be kept up to date with her condition as we had become friends over the years. This leads to last night. I had been covering the late night shift all week when around 11:30 p.m. I was driving by Jane's house. The bus was completely empty, but as I approached the stop, I thought of Jane as I normally do. For some reason, I had an urge to stop at the bus stop outside her house. Even though I could see there wasn't anyone waiting, the urge was so strong that I did. I opened the doors and waited for a second. A cold rush of air entered the bus, and I closed the doors and drove on. I could feel a presence on the bus. About 5 minutes later, or 6 stops down the road, I felt someone next to my cab on the bus, as if someone was waiting to get off. I stopped again and opened the doors. I felt the presence leave, and I again continued on, feeling a bit confused. I fully believe in the paranormal. So when I got a call this morning from Jane's son to tell me she passed away 2 nights ago in her home around 11 p.m., I broke down. I had forgotten about the strange feeling I had that night with a presence on my bus until the funeral. I took the day off and attended the funeral for Jane, before going back to the son's house for the wake. The son's house was 30 seconds from the stop where I had let the presents off. I don't know if this is crazy or if I'm just being stupid, but I picked up a presents from right outside Jane's house 30 minutes after she passed and dropped it off at her son's house. Could I have taken Jane's soul on a final trip to see her son before she passed on to whatever is beyond? I really want to believe I did, so I have comfort in the idea that I drove her one last time to see her son one last time. Does anyone else have an experience like this? Thank you, and sorry for the long read. Last October, I was in California for roughly 11 days after my brother's wedding in San Diego. I just wanted to drive around the state and visit California places that had captured my imagination over the years, and I loved driving almost as much as I loved cars. I don't necessarily believe in Sasquatch, but I would never discount someone else's experience, especially if I wasn't there, so off I went. Clipper Mills is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, about 70 miles northeast of Sacramento. Very near that dam was in danger of failing last year, pretty remote. So after Bodega Bay, I had to cross the state for my destination, arriving near Sacramento in time for a late dinner. So it's after dark when I set out on the final leg, very dark. It takes me a good while on all the twisty turning roads to find my way there. I wanted to get to the exact spot the person who posted the video parked that night. He wouldn't say in his video, so I poked around YouTube's comment sections in related videos and found out more or less about the spot. Around 11 p.m., I pulled my rented Camry well off the dark 2-lane road to avoid any issues with the very sparse traffic. I saw no one whatsoever, so I sat in the darkened interior, listening, allowing my eyes to dark adapt for about 20 minutes. I heard nothing but assorted insects as I sat there, saw nothing move at all. Eventually, not wanting to activate the car's interior lighting, I crawled out of the driver's side window into the black night, armed with my cell with no service, a handheld GPS to find my way back should I get lost in the dark, and a red flashlight I use with my telescope. I stood there right by that car window for a solid 2 minutes before I could screw up the courage to move away from my Camry. Eventually, I walked up the road, still not hearing anything but bugs. Suddenly, without conscious decision to do so, I veered right and headed up into the woods. My feet were crunching pine needles now, and to my mind, I sounded like Bigfoot stomping around. After about 20 minutes, I stopped to listen and added to the insects. I heard this faint screeching sound far off in the blackness, and it didn't sound insect-like at all. It had more consciousness to it. Then, now also thoroughly dark adapted, my mind was whispering that it sounds like a person in distress or a large primate. I remained still. I heard something small scurrying around in the underbrush as well, followed a minute later by that same forlorn-sounding wail, but now closer. Time to return to the car. As I was walking back to the car, I heard this spooky sound every 20 to 30 seconds, and now it was coming from behind me and in front of me. It seemed to have a vocabulary of some sort to me, different vocalizations, some guttural, some high-pitched, and everywhere in between. My mind was having fun just messing with me. Now, I was never so happy to see a Camry in all my life. I started it up before my ass was in the seat, I think, and half expected to see scores of red eyeballs glowing at me in the headlights from the dark forest in front of me. Now spooked in my mind, telling me some homicidal axe-wielding lunatic was nipping at my heels. I went back the way I came at a much quicker pace than I had arrived. Out of nowhere, right in front of me, this black lab ran out of the woods on one side of the road and into the woods on the other. I barely missed crushing him. That scared the hell out of me right there. I slowed down a bit, and the thought of nearly mowing down an innocent mutt overcame my mind. Some hour down the road towards Sacramento is when I noticed I had cell service again. I opened my Expedia app and found a nearby hotel for the night. Once safely enclosed in the hotel room, I began scouring the internet on my iPad and came to the conclusion that what I heard was a barred owl or a western screech owl. Can never be 100% sure, I suppose. Very creepy though, and I'm done with wandering alone in the dark at night, I think. During my spring break of 1977, my family and 3 other families from the neighborhood I grew up in traveled to a Holiday Inn in Navarre Beach. My mother had told me it was a newly opened hotel. It had an indoor pool, arcade, gift shop, deli, and small movie theater. For its day, it was considered to be a very nice place, and my family went to this hotel 3 times. During our second visit in August of 1977, the film Jaws Roman II was being filmed at Navarre, and I even got to see the mechanical Jaws stored with other movie equipment and props in the eastern portion of the hotel parking lot. During this spring break vacation around late March of 1977, there was a special showing of the film Bugsy Malone, which only children were permitted to attend. It was during the film that I started to feel a bit disoriented. I heard some other children crying, and I heard the sound of someone throwing up. At one point in the film, I got up from my chair to leave, but I was quickly escorted back to my chair by an usher in a black suit and black hat. I saw 1 or maybe 2 more men in black suits at the back of the theater. After the film was over, I felt just fine, and I never did complain to anyone about that experience. One evening on this vacation, I awoke and sat up in my bed. I looked across the room and could see a group of small figures in the dimly lit room. My brother was asleep to my right, and my parents were asleep in the bed to my left. The feeling I felt was something I had felt before, which I immediately recognized. It was a feeling I only felt when the Greys were near. I thought, it's been a while. And to a young boy about to turn 7, it had been over 2 years since his last encounter with the Greys, so it had felt like a long time. But then I could not move, and one of the figures moved towards me very fast, and the last thing I recalled was its big black eyes very close to my face and a wand-like object being pointed at me. Then there was blackness. The next thing I recall was being in the sand dunes away from the hotel in a circle of children. I must have been one of the youngest because I was the shortest. But my attention was more on the blue object directly over us that had a glowing blue light all about it. The closest thing I've seen to this shade of blue would be that of the blue glow of Cherenkov radiation that I've only seen in photos. Then there was blackness. The next morning was a Saturday, and I was watching cartoons. It was not till I was watching TV that I recalled that night's experience with the Greys and seeing the blue glowing sphere above me and the other children. I then told one of the other children who were traveling with us on this trip about my experience that night, and she did not believe me. I also recall walking around the hotel later that day and then getting up the nerve to tell my older brother, who also teased me. Hello, I'm a bus driver in a small town in England, and I think I've just picked up a passenger's soul on my bus. This happened 2 nights ago. I've worked with this bus company for 1 and 2 years, and I have driven the same route for 3 years. Over this time, I have gotten regulars that I've come to know as I see them multiple times a day, some young and some old. I take them to work or to the shops and bingo. I often jump out to help my older passengers with their shopping and whatnot. I've had a passenger that I've taken for the full 3 years I've done this route. Let's call her Jane. Jane is an elderly lady who suffers from dementia. She was well functioning for the last 2.5 years. Sometimes a little confused, but I was always patient and helped her however she needed. I used to pick her up from the bus stop right outside her house, literally a 10-second walk from her door to the bus stop. Every day I'd take her from her house to the local shopping center where she played bingo with friends. However, her dementia worsened in the last 6 months after an incident on my bus where she got very confused and distressed. I had to stop my bus and try to settle her down. Someone on the bus knew her son, who thankfully worked close by and came over to help. I told my manager, who understood and approved, for my passengers to get off my bus and catch the next one just behind, so I could stay with Jane. Her son came, calmed her down, took her home, and thanked me for the help. We spoke about Jane, and I explained how we had become friendly over the last few years I had been on the route. I explained she hadn't freaked out like this before. He said he knew, and she spoke fondly of me. Her dementia had worsened, causing her to have bad spells. He took my number and said he would get in touch to arrange a gift for looking after Jane. I insisted it was okay and that I didn't want a gift, but he insisted. He took my number and his mother and left the bus. I never saw Jane again after that day, but I did see the son at the shops. He explained that Jane had gotten worse and unfortunately wasn't safe to leave the house. I thanked him for letting me know, wished her the best, and asked to be kept up to date with her condition as we had become friends over the years. This leads to last night. I had been covering the late night shift all week when around 11:30 p.m. I was driving by Jane's house. The bus was completely empty, but as I approached the stop, I thought of Jane as I normally do. For some reason, I had an urge to stop at the bus stop outside her house. Even though I could see there wasn't anyone waiting, the urge was so strong that I did. I opened the doors and waited for a second. A cold rush of air entered the bus, and I closed the doors and drove on. I could feel a presence on the bus. About 5 minutes later, or 6 stops down the road, I felt someone next to my cab on the bus, as if someone was waiting to get off. I stopped again and opened the doors. I felt the presence leave, and I again continued on, feeling a bit confused. I fully believe in the paranormal, so when I got a call this morning from Jane's son to tell me she passed away 2 nights ago in her home around 11 p.m., I broke down. I had forgotten about the strange feeling I had that night with a presence on my bus until the funeral. I took the day off and attended the funeral for Jane before going back to the son's house for the wake. The son's house was 30 seconds from the stop where I had let the presence off. I don't know if this is crazy or if I'm just being stupid, but I picked up a presence from right outside Jane's house 30 minutes after she passed and dropped it off at her son's house. Could I have taken Jane's soul on a final trip to see her son before she passed on to whatever is beyond? I really want to believe I did, so I have comfort in the idea that I drove her one last time to see her son one last time. Does anyone else have an experience like this? Thank you, and sorry for the long read. A few years ago, a good friend of ours was in a car severe accident in which the passenger was in critical condition whom I didn't know, and the driver, who was our friend, was also in critical but worse condition. Within the first 12 hours, our friend, whom I will refer to as Mary from here on out, died at the hospital. I am unsure of the fate of the passengers, as I didn't know them, but I believe they did survive. Originally, the news of her death was brought up to me by another friend, and later confirmed it when I looked it up and saw it on a news webpage, stating her full first and last name, which I might add is not a common last name at all, but don't feel comfortable disclosing here, circumstances of the accident and location of the accident. After a couple days of checking for an obituary to get funeral details, I eventually saw it around day 2 or 3, but unfortunately, it said the family wished to have a private funeral open only to relatives. Death wasn't a new thing to me, as I unfortunately already had a few friends pass by this point in time. But it was pretty unsettling not being able to say my final goodbyes at a funeral, as is usually the norm. Fast forward about 3-4 months or so. I'm going about my daily routine and coming up to a 4-way stop sign at nearly the same time as another car. The other car pulled up to the stop sign at the road perpendicular to my right. I remember this so vividly and will never forget it. Knowing a car was there, I probably glanced at my phone for a second to let them go ahead, and some loud screaming caught my ear over the sound of the radio. I blow it off for a second, but it continues in increased frequency. I look over real quick, look forward again, and then it crosses my mind. No way in hell. And I look back over again, and damn if it isn't Mary leaning out her window of that other car, waving her arms all around, screaming my name, trying to get my attention. The weirdest chill and feeling came over my body, literally as if I'm seeing a ghost and questioning my sanity on whether I was seeing things. At this point, I yelled out the window to tell her to turn right and pull over on the first street, which was within eyesight. I get out of the car and literally am stuttering and don't have the first clue of what to say. and she just decides at that point to lean in and give me a hug. She was solid and I could feel her hugging me, so at that point, I was assured that she wasn't a ghost lol. I explained to her how I'd grieved over her death and how I saw her obituary and everything, and she thought I was half crazy. I wish I could explain the way it feels to see somebody you knew was dead for a few months, and then be able to hug them and have a chat in the most unexpected way possible. But I don't even know if there is a word in the English language to describe it. Now, where it gets really interesting is after sharing all the details I knew of her passing and accident. Everything matched up minus the death part, but I vividly remember seeing the obituary and the news article with her name, and all the details of the accident that I explained to her. She actually did get in a terrible accident, and was just released from the hospital a couple weeks before I saw her after she spent a couple months in the hospital. The exact road and location I told her were the correct spots too. The first 30 days she was in the hospital, she was in a coma and had a rough recovery and many surgeries following that, so it wasn't minor by any means. Later that day, I tried finding the obituary and news article, but they were nowhere to be found. But where did I get all the info from? This has been weird for a while, but for the longest time I blew it off as someone with the same name in a similar location, but I can't find anything on that either. The likelihood of someone with her exact unusual name is highly unlikely too. Not sure if this was a glitch or if I shifted timelines. We went sailing in the British Virgin Islands for a vacation when I was 16 with another family, 2 sets of parents, myself, and their 13-year-old for 10 days on a 30-ish foot sailboat. I can't remember, it felt small. I am terrified of swimming in water where I can't see the bottom, but there it was crystal clear. It was halfway through our trip and we went to visit and snorkel the wreck of the Rhone, which looked just under the water from the surface, but was actually pretty far down. The water started to get too choppy for my taste, and seeing the scuba divers and huge tarpon fish harmless was making me uneasy. So I told everyone I was going back to the boat. They all decided to follow to our mooring. When I got close to the boat, I noticed something under the boat. The keel part of the boat has always scared me for some reason too, so I try to avoid looking at it. As I get closer, the rest of the crew following me, I realize it is a 5 barracuda. This thing is nasty and just hanging under the keel like it wasn't moving. Of course I knew they were dangerous, but I also had on jewelry, a belly ring 90s, and a shiny gold swimming suit. I stopped dead, everyone else gathers behind me, and a few of us surface to decide how we will approach the ladder of the boat, while the rest watch said fish for movement. Being that I had tons of adrenaline and was a competition swimmer, I offered myself up first. I swam the fastest I've ever swam and pulled myself up as fast as I could, looking it directly in the eye until I surfaced. The rest of the crew, not quite as nimble as I am, I'm pretty sure there was some rum involved, hung back. The fish didn't move, so one by one they frantically swam to get on the boat. That fish did not get to taste any of our crowd. It didn't stop there. The water started to get even more choppy. I had on a motion sickness patch because I had never been on a sailboat so long, so I was okay. But suddenly tropical storm warnings start to come across the radio as a giant gray cloud closes in. It went from a beautiful tropical day to hell within 15 minutes. We scrambled inside, life vests radioing as they rushed to take down the sails. Suddenly a gust of wind took the mainsail and almost dipped the entire boat sideways. The mast was within feet of the water. My decision to swim back to the boat early, barracuda and all, proved to have been almost intuitive. For the next few hours there was zero visibility and the scariest moments of my young life. We were no longer moored, so they just took down the sails, faced the bow into the wind and basically motored in place. We couldn't see the island's any other ships, just pelting rain and the boom of the hull hitting trough of each wave. They had to take turns steering because it was blinding and disorienting, and took turns riding out the storm inside. I don't remember how high they said the waves were, but I remember feeling a sense of imminent death. When I'm afraid, I mean petrified, I shut down and everything happens in slow-mo. With each wave, it felt like the boat went flying up into the air on the crest. Then a moment of flying feeling, then crashing down so hard that I was sure the hull of the boat was going to split open. This went on for hours. So, to paint the picture, I am just sitting at the table holding on for dear life and dodging falling unsecured items in my life jacket. The 13-year-old is screaming and crying, "We are going to die," over and over in different ways. My mother has her head in the garbage can and is holding on trying to throw up, until finally her fear kicks in and things start coming out of both ends every time she heaves. Then I'm consoling her that it's okay. The 3 others are coming in and out for breaks. Each time we can see that it looks more and more like a hurricane outside. Eventually I find my composure, yell at the girl to shut the F up because she isn't helping anyone, and move some towels under and around my mom and try to help her clean up, while she cried, which she was trying desperately to console me, but was too seasick to get a word in. But she knew I was emotionally mature enough to do the best I could to take charge. It felt like hours of near death, up and down, silence then crash, flying then feeling the boat would crack, over and over while everyone else is screaming at each other. Finally, hours later, it just stops. Dead calm. We see we are approaching an island, Virgin Gorda or Peter Island, I can't remember, and as if nothing happened, we pull up into the marina on a calm and quiet sea. None of us talk really until our feet hit the dock, except my mother, whom I helped shower off and clean up. We cheered, hugged, laughed, I finally cried, and we walked ashore to get the F away from that boat for a while. We found a gorgeous bath facility attached to the marina and showered and basked in light of being alive. We asked, "What is the nicest restaurant here?" and were directed to this small, quaint place right on the water. We ate and drank. I was legal there, ordered giant plates of delicacies, and just laughed in wonder about how happy we were to be alive, no crashing into anyone or an island, drifting, running out of fuel, boat breaking in half, being swept away or drowning. We were happy to be alive, though I haven't been on a single hull sailboat since I prefer catamaran style now, I guess. I wanted to take the time to describe a terrifying experience that I recently had during my travels for work. To this day, logic still defies the events that transpired, and they have haunted me ever since. I am still afraid to stop my car at highway rest areas to this very day. I recently landed a position in sales with a very solid company in the medical device industry. Being in my mid-20s, I am thrilled to work for such an innovative company. The money is great, the job is fun, and hell, they even gave me a company vehicle. That's a great perk. The only downside to the job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and covers several states, and because of budget constraints, they expect me to drive to most of my customers. I could not complain, however. Not many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. I finished up my workday at a hospital in central Pennsylvania when I received a phone call from a clinic in western New York that wanted to place a buy for my products, but before they could do so, they wanted a product demo. Not wanting to lose the opportunity, I agreed to be there by 9 a.m. My GPS showed the trip to be 5 hours if I took a highway that cut through the Allegheny forest. Being that it was now 5 p.m., I figured that I could make the drive now since I had a bag packed with extra scrubs, toiletries, and product manuals from my current trip. I headed to a gas station, filled my SUV, purchased some snacks and 2 energy drinks, and hopped on the single-lane highway north towards New York State. It was the middle of November and quite cold, with the sun setting early and giving way to darkness in the late afternoon. By the time I had started my drive, it was already dark. Thick clouds were obscuring the moonlight. A wall of trees surrounded my vehicle on both sides, making it seem that I was driving my SUV through a tunnel of wood and darkness. The headlights from my vehicle illuminating the staggered white lines separating the lanes of the highway were the only source of light. The drive definitely took on an ominous feel. I thought nothing of it as I slugged back my energy drinks and listened to some comedy podcasts to pass the time. When I was about 2 hours into my drive, The inevitable happened when one has had large amounts of caffeine and a belly full of gas station snacks. I had to find a restroom eventually, which I was okay with since I wanted to get out of the car and stretch my legs anyway. I had passed a small town about 15 minutes back, and I knew that I would need to find another one and pull off the highway or see if there was a rest stop anywhere ahead. Almost as if fate had heard me beckoning, I saw a sign that said, "Rest area 2 miles." This is my lucky night, I thought as I realized that I would not have to resort to relieving myself in the middle of the woods on a dark and creepy night. I came upon the rest area, which was located right off of the side of the highway. It was nothing like the rest areas one is used to encountering on major highways. There were no restaurants or vending machines. There was a single, lonely picnic table and a garbage can on a patch of grass and 2 separate brick buildings with brown metal roofs on them. A single overhead street lamp barely illuminated my oasis as it was flickering on and off, probably from neglect considering how remote this place was and how little use it was getting. The building to the left housed the ladies' restrooms, while the one to my right housed the men's restrooms. I placed my car in park in one of the 10 available spots in front of the buildings and grabbed my phone to keep me entertained while I took care of business. As I walked on the narrow concrete walkway towards the restrooms, I caught a glimpse of something in the woods behind the rest area. It was still quite dark outside, and the overhead light provided too little illumination to discern what I was looking at. All I could see at that distance was an obscure black shape shifting through the thick trees. It could have simply been my eyes playing tricks on me since I had spent the better part of the day, either in a brightly lit operating room or driving down a pitch-black highway. I shrugged my shoulders and made my way into the men's room. There were 3 stalls at the far end of the restroom flanking 3 urinals. 2 flimsy overhead lights with exposed bulbs were the only sources of light. One of the panels had a bulb completely out, and the other was flickering sporadically, making the entire room look like it was lit by strobe lights in a nightclub. Just perfect, I thought. I'm stuck in the creepiest bathroom in the world, and I can barely see anything. I decided not to make a big deal about it. I'd be back on the road shortly. I took the stall in the middle. I had no reason why, I'd simply just randomly selected it. I sat down and nearly jumped from how cold the seat was. This was becoming quite an annoyance. At that moment I had no idea, but things were about to get a whole hell of a lot worse. As I was in the midst of doing my business, the lights went out. Of all the times that this pathetic, single tubular bulb could have called it quits, it had to do so when I was using a restroom in one of the most isolated spots in the state. "You've got to be kidding me," I groaned out loud. At this point, the light from my phone was the only source of light cutting through the shroud of darkness that crept over the entire room. It was only at this point that I realized how quiet it had been this entire time. Aside from sound of the slight breeze outside hitting the building, it was dead silent. I sat there in silence, playing games on my phone when I first heard it. At first, it sounded like a faint shuffling sound, the obscure noise of someone or something making its way towards the entrance of the restroom. I found this rather odd because I would have heard another vehicle pull up since the parking lot was right across from the 2 buildings. The shuffling then became more discernible. It was footsteps. Slow, trudging footsteps were making their way into the restroom. By how loud they were, whoever or whatever this was had entered the room. As the footsteps continued, I noticed that they were making a slapping sound against the tile floor. It was as if this person or thing was barefoot. The footsteps became heavier and louder, and I noticed that they were moving towards the stalls. I locked my phone screen and sat there frozen with fear. My heart was pounding out of my chest and sweat started to creep across my brow despite the chill in the air. By this point, along with the heavy, slapping footsteps, I heard the breathing. This thing's breathing was too otherworldly to be human. It took long, heavy, animal-like breaths and exhaled in a way that resembled an asthmatic with a faint whistle at the end. I had never heard such a thing. By this point, my bowels were completely voided from fear, and I was grateful that I had been sitting on a toilet, for I would have *T my pants had I not been. This foreboding presence continued to trudge towards me until I heard its heavy breaths right outside the door to the stall. In the pitch-black restroom, all I could hear was this thing breathing a mere few feet away from me, now certain that it was aware of my presence. My heart continued to pound as I heard it shuffle around outside of the stall. I had never felt so helpless in my life. I was trapped here at the mercy of this creature. After what I imagine was several minutes, the breathing quieted down some. I had pulled my feet up and I was squatted on the toilet in fear of this thing seeing me. I knew that it was still there, but for whatever reason, call it curiosity or perhaps a fear-induced lack of judgment, I took out my phone and flicked up the flashlight app and pointed it at the floor underneath the stall door entrance. I nearly dropped my phone in horror at what I saw. 2 massive feet were pointed straight at me. They were unbelievable large, too large to be human. The tops of them were covered with a matted brown and gray hair, while the toes were a pale purplish-colored flesh with toenails that were long, ragged, and yellow. I barely had time to notice the grotesque feet of this creature when it took notice of the light and let out a monstrous growl that shattered the silence of the pitch-black room. It sounded like a growl that came straight from hell. It was a primal, guttural, inhuman voice. The noise was deafening. My terror had completely overtaken me as I fell onto the floor and prepared to meet my doom at the hands of this beast. I closed my eyes as I heard it begin to pound on the door, cracking noises indicating that it was getting closer on every strike to breaking the stall open and getting its probably equally grotesque hands on me. Just when I thought that I was a dead man, the monster had quieted down and ceased its assault on the stall door. I opened my eyes. I was still alive for now. It was then that I heard another familiar sound from the other side of the room, those heavy, slapping footsteps. Jesus Christ, there are 2 of them, I thought as terror pierced every muscle in my body as I lay limp on the floor. I heard the second set of footsteps grow closer. Slap, slap, slap. As I prepared to meet my fate where I'd no doubt be torn in half by 2 forest beasts, that's when the face-off happened. Both creatures began to growl at each other back and forth, as if locked in some sort of display of alpha male aggression. After several exchanges, they made their move. I heard the sound of flesh hitting flesh and bodies slamming up against the walls. I flicked my flashlight app back on and pointed it towards the noise as I looked from under the stall. The 2 creatures were locked in a life and death melee. They were growling inhumanly as they pushed each other back and forth, blood spilling onto the floor from what I imagined was them clawing and biting at each other in this life and death struggle. As their battle continued, one began to back away out of the entrance to the men's room, and the other followed in a frantic sprint. I still heard their inhuman growls as their battle continued outside until their voices trailed off into a barely audible drone in the woods. As terrified as I was, I got to my feet and exited the stall. I pointed the light from my phone against the floor. There was dark red blood and tufts of grayish-brown fur all over the floor. It looked like someone field-dressed an animal carcass in here. The stench was unbearable. It smelled like the inside of an animal cage at the zoo. What the hell were these things? I was not going to stick around and find out. I sprinted back to my car, entered, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of the parking lot like I was in a street race against death. My truck tires screeched as I careened out of the entrance and back onto the highway. I was covered in sweat and hyperventilating, having narrowly escaped a horrible death at the hands of some primal beasts from a forgotten era. I sped the rest of the way to my destination in New York. I arrived and checked into a hotel. I sat at the bar and downed several scotches before even dropping my bags in the room. My rattled nerves settled down eventually, and I made my way to my room. I lay on the bed sleepless, but sure of 2 things. I was not taking that route back home, and I was never stopping at a rest stop ever again.
Thanks for listening. Hope you already fallen asleep. See you tomorrow at the same time.